He's a great kid. Hi, welcome to Healthy Alternatives, where we explore complementary and alternative healthcare choices, as well as other lifestyle choices that promote and enhance human health. And our guest tonight, once again, is Dr. Michael Kane.
Thank you for having me.
The Connecticut Center for Health
Yep.
in Middletown and West Hartford.
Correct.
Right. And the last time you were on our show, Dr. Kane, we spoke about GMOs, genetically modified foods, and we're going to do that again tonight. But just briefly, for people who maybe didn't get to see our last program, can you explain what a naturopath is and your approach to health and well-being?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So naturopathic physicians are physicians that are different. Our training is different than MDs or medical doctors. And there's a couple things that are significantly different. The first 2 years of our training is pretty identical to traditional medical school. And then it kind of takes a left turn and we focus a lot on preventative medicine. So we get trained a lot in nutrition, both looking at the aspects of food to kind of stay healthy, but also if people have like certain conditions, what would you eat to kind of help that condition? So using food as medicine.
Oh.
We also study a lot of the biochemistry of the body, trying to figure out, if something's going on for somebody, what is the way we can support the natural healing processes without, taking over function or, going to medications as a first line of defense. So in our kind of, assessment, we typically spend a lot of time with people. Like our visits are close to an hour initially.
Wow.
So, it's like...
And that's sitting, talking to the patient and...
Right. So it's, getting a complete history, kind of finding out the details of, somebody from a more holistic perspective and, coming out with a plan to really try to determine if we can find an underlying cause for something or, and then, treat that cause rather than just give them something to take care of the symptoms. Like a great example is I saw somebody today who had chronic eczema. And, they said they've been to their doctor. They gave them a steroidal cream, which takes care of the symptoms. It suppresses the immune system, but it doesn't get at the cause of the reason why there's this skin inflammatory process. So we take the time to try to figure out, okay, what is it that's causing this so we can eradicate it so you don't need to rely on, taking medication for the rest of your life.
Right, and it seems to me that with the traditional medicine, they study a lot of the pathology in order to prescribe a drug to treat the symptom.
Right. So where we would kind of study the pathology to try to figure out, all right, what parts of the body's, biochemical process help that recover.
So there's more of you study the pathology in order to discover a healing process that can occur.
Right.
Rather than just stopping at the pathology and sort of glossing over it with a prescription drug.
So, the other aspects of, what we do, we study a lot of botanical medicine, so plants and their derivatives and extracts. And, I know my grandmother used to always recommend different things, to treat different things. And, part of it would be, but, some of the stuff has a long history of use. And so
we should be paying attention to because it's sort of evidence in a way and people use it because it works.
Exactly. And then, with the, advent of more scientific study into these, treatments, we can apply the scientific model to look and see, all right, is garlic really effective for, its anti-cholesterol effects or its, kind of antiviral effects.
Right, bacteria, or right, it may be antibacterial
microbial,
antimicrobial, right.
So,
and now we have, Dr. Oz is sort of, it seems that everywhere natural products are being
promoted in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And food in particular.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So we, study botanical medicine. We also get a lot of training in counseling. And, what has been interesting.
Counseling, i.e. emotional counseling?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and, we are really taught in how to listen. And one of the things that is always amazing is people will come out of a first office appointment and say to my receptionist, he really listened to me. Like they never had that experience.
Well, especially in doctor's office.
And, that in and of itself is, a function of what we believe is that, if you really pay attention and you give somebody the present time connection, that, they're going to feel, number one, listened to, they're going to feel acknowledged, and, a lot of times you can really elicit from them what their thinking is behind their healing process. So it's that, engagement, where it's not just telling you, Lauren, you need to do this. It's saying, so what have you done that works for you already? So in that process, that the person knows something about their body already,
Or they don't.
right. But, most of the time, it is amazing to me that a lot of people have an understanding of, what I need to do, kind of that I'm not doing list. Mm-hmm. And it's just trying to kind of prioritize it with them so that they can feel like they're focusing on it. So, the aspects of what we try to do is to be that person that tries to look at the whole picture in a way, but also eliciting, as much participation on the part of the patient.
Right. So a partnership, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, if we do that successfully, somebody feels like they are kind of engaged in their healing process.
And I would think maybe that feeling of empowerment is actually going to promote healing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we know that, the importance of emotional health is huge. I can tell you the number of people that I see where, the stress factors have a huge role to play in their, kind of condition.
Yeah, and stress is, it's everywhere.
No, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, getting...
And anxiety and depression.
Right.
Which, of course, these are the biggies. When you watch television, you've got the...
all the commercials on all the drugs that
exactly.
treat insomnia, anxiety, depression, and, you listen to those and you say... Oh.
And you almost feel like, I can't do this on my own. I need to get this prescription drug.
Right.
So you're sort of already, right from the get-go, it's sort of like this powerlessness idea passed on to people.
Oh, you mean that they feel like they need the drug to do something?
Yeah, you got to have the drug. You got a cold, you got to get the antibiotics. You got an allergy, you need to take some antihistamine.
Sure.
So
that empowerment of, trying to work with somebody to figure out, okay, what is it that I can do that's going to help me along?
Because these, all these drugs, as we know, have side effects, and it seems like the side effects are getting more and more severe, like, heart attacks and death and,
it is amazing.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So
let me just finish the part of what we do. The other thing we study is something called homeopathy.
Yes, homeopathy.
Homeopathy is very, very interesting. It's a form of treatment that uses very diluted forms of things found in nature that we prescribe on the basis of like treating like. So, for example, if somebody came in with a rash that resembled poison ivy, I might give them homeopathic poison ivy, which is, diluted. So it's more energetic than it is chemical. Mm-hmm. So in the preparation of homeopathic remedies, you literally take 1 drop of, an extract, put it in 100 drops of water, take 1 drop of that, put it in 100 drops of water, and do that between 30 and 200 times.
Wow.
When I went to school to study, and homeopathy was one of the things that we studied, I was like,
how could this work?
Right. How could this work? And it wasn't until when I was in clinic where I was treating infants who have no concept of the placebo effect.
Oh, okay.
And we would use, homeopathic remedies on them because they're very safe for kids. Mm-hmm. And I saw that they
responded
better.
Unbelievable.
And so a lot of people might be familiar with the homeopathic remedies, like they have the homeopathic teething pellets for
colic, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So they have those. They have one of the most common ones is arnica for trauma or injury. Mm-hmm. So some people are familiar with those, but
those little blue vials at the health food store,
exactly.
Or sometimes they're bottles, but they're little pills.
Yep. But the belief is that we are each born with a constitution. Mm-hmm. And when we get stressed, our body is going to manifest symptoms in a certain pattern. So let's say we had, 20 people in this room and we stressed them all, in some fashion, not to be sadistic or anything, but it would, you might have somebody who gets headaches, somebody else who gets stomach ache, somebody else who gets a rash, somebody else who gets insomnia. But that pattern of expression is something that is, associated with their constitutional makeup. So what we try to do in homeopathy is match a remedy with their constitution. And oftentimes it just is almost like an energetic boost so that when they are stressed, that they don't have to suffer those symptoms as significantly or at all.
It almost sounds to me like homeopathy is sort of like I hate to use the word vaccine, but you're taking a same amount of something that's causing the problem,
right?
And
right.
due to some external cause, and introducing it in a very small amount, and then the body just sort of
has a response.
A healing response.
Right. So I can see that analogy. It is so minute, though. It's more the energetics of it that are.
And when you say energetics, I don't think maybe some people understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the best I can explain it, and I have an undergraduate degree in physics, so we know that the body's energy doesn't stop just at our skin.
Right.
That if we had a kind of
special camera.
No, a special camera or a measurement, we could measure energetic fields.
Right.
The amplitude, the frequency of kind of what you.
Yeah, we've got all this stuff going on between us.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
all around our bodies.
So that my belief is that homeopathy is something like understanding what your pattern might be, and then giving you something that might put you in harmonics. Like a frequency that's harmonious with your body. So that's what I believe homeopathy does. It's more the energetic tuning. So if you have a guitar that's out of tune, and you tune it, it's going to function much better. So, and it might not lose its kind of tune unless you kind of do something pretty significant, like change the temperature or something. But that's kind of a general description of homeopathy, at least. Mm-hmm. So, naturopaths have been in Connecticut and licensed practitioners for over 90 years.
Wow.
So it's not a new profession. The challenge is our scope of practice hasn't changed in that time. Like I was trained in Washington State, and there we could do minor surgery.
Really?
We could deliver babies. We could do prescriptions for IV and injectable nutrients.
Oh, okay.
And Connecticut is more conservative. We haven't upgraded the laws, so we're trying to work on that.
Change that.
Yeah, exactly. So that gives you a good idea. And, most of the insurances in Connecticut, like all the big guys, cover naturopathic services, so it's a good thing.
Good.
Yeah.
And, my daughter went to your...
One of my colleagues, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
she had a wonderful experience. Yes,
okay.
she did. So for anyone who's thinking of, I've sent my daughter and I'm going to make an appointment myself. So I think that it's, first of all, just the time spent with the patient and the extent of information that you can share with a healthcare practitioner.
No.
I think is really wonderful.
Taking on that role very seriously of doctor as teacher,
Right.
And trying to really kind of educate someone in how they can best, care for themselves.
Especially as, we get older, we're always encouraged, get your colonoscopy, get your...
Right.
This test, that test, and all these tests, and then you get these tests, and then that's the extent of it. It's almost like, get the test, and meanwhile, you've already got a disease, now what are you going to do? So it seems to make more sense. Exactly. To me, that would be a wiser use of healthcare dollars, anyway. To have that.
I would agree.
So you want to move on to genetically modified foods now? Want to recap what we talked about last week or last time?
Sure. Last time we talked some about the kind of issue that's facing us in relation to the modification genetically of foods that are out there in the market and the effect they're having on our health and the kind of issues that are very serious in relation to the health of our overall food supply. So, we talked in general and then tried to get some more specifics about it. But I think it's important currently because we have a chance here in Connecticut to be one of the first states that would make it mandatory for the labeling of genetically modified foods. Right now, you go into a supermarket, you pick something up, you have no idea if something is genetically modified or not. And, most people from polling say that if they knew, they would choose not to eat it. Like 80 to 90% in most polls. So that information is not readily available. You have to, kind of do a significant amount of homework to find out what companies are doing.
Stating that they don't have.
Right, exactly. So it makes it, very difficult for the average consumer who, might not have the time, the energy, to take that time to find out. So Connecticut has a bill before the House at this moment that needs to be brought up for a vote. It's House Bill 6519, and there's another one that is dealing with genetic modification of baby food before the House. And
so why are they separate? So do you think they maybe do the baby food and not the grown-up food?
Yeah, the importance obviously in a growing child is different, but still significant for everybody. But they did separate them for some reason. But what needs to happen is that we need to put pressure on the Speaker of the House to bring these to a vote. Because they could die.
They could just languish in the House, in the scrap heap of legislation.
And we've got, the session lasts until the beginning of June, so we've got, like a 6-week window
to kind of encourage them to
act.
Bring it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, so what are we talking about here, Dr. Kane, with genetically modified foods, and what exactly happens
to
a food stuff?
Yep. So I mean, we're probably familiar from, like high school biology of, the type of modification or natural breeding that can take place between, members of the same species. When you look at dogs, for example, and the diversity within, that species.
Or even human beings.
Right.
Right.
So that expression of, the vast array of, what we would call the, phenotype, what we look like, on the outside, is basically through natural breeding, or what we call vertical gene transfer.
So in other words, it's like you're breeding a dog with a dog, or a human with a human, or an apple with an apple.
Right. So it's the same species. The DNA is, very similar, but there's traits that, just get exchanged. We're not talking about that. I mean, that has been gone on through, centuries.
Thousands of years.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're talking about something called horizontal gene transfer, meaning we're engineering it so that we're taking genes from a species that has nothing to do with another species and kind of just throwing it together and seeing what happens.
Could you give us an example?
Sure. Like we might have a gene that gives a bacteria some antibiotic resistance. And we might have that expressed in a whole slew of bacteria. So it's taking, a gene that is in one species of bacteria and transmitting it through different species. So they're not the same. And so So it would almost be like if we were to give a human bacteria to a dog. Or just trying to look at a trait from a plant or animal and saying, let's try and see if we can isolate that. Like they're doing some work with, like the webs of spiders, trying to figure out if we can, kind of take that strength of a spider web and cross it with a plant that might produce some of these fibers that we can use somewhere else. So it's what the issue is that when they promote, this genetically modified foods, they say it's just like natural breeding, when in fact it's nothing like natural breeding. It's using viruses or bacteria to take genes from a very different species and have that virus and bacteria bring it into that species and have that DNA incorporated. And then, watching and seeing how it expresses itself. Yeah, so in other words, the virus or bacteria is the carrier for the gene transfer. Material. For the gene transfer. So, yeah, and you've got to wonder. So you've altered the DNA of an organism or a plant, or right, exactly. And then once that's altered, their offspring is altered as well, isn't it? Yes, and so there's no turning back. It's not like, well, it's just this one generation of plant. No. You're sort of screwing up all the plants now. Yes, and we used to think that that vertical transfer, species to species, is kind of the only way we really share material genetically. I mean horizontal. We used to think that you can only species within a species. Within a species, right. Exactly. But now we're finding that there is this horizontal transfer that's happening. For example, when they use bacteria in this genetically modified method, they're finding that the bacteria in the species that's been altered is still present, and it can get into the soil and then take whatever genetic material and infect the soil bacteria so that now the soil bacteria would have some traits that it never had before. Mm. So, we know that...
So this is almost like...
a bad sci-fi movie.
Yeah, it's sort of like evolution sort of dictated by a corporation that's creating these genetically modified substances. You don't even know what to call the things. No. Substances, what?
Right. I mean, they're altered, basically.
So in other words, it's really the entire DNA of the world.
Yes, we're messing with a big thing. Mm-hmm. So most people who have had, any experience in hospitals of late know that there's a concern about,
these
superbugs. And, what we know is that, kind of trait transfer is happening, and it could be really helped by some of the work that they've been doing with this genetically modified issues, because in the process they do create strains of bacteria that are, kind of
strong because they got to carry the message, right? Yeah.
Right, but part of the process is they have traits that they kind of know are present in the bacteria.
Okay.
Like that it's antibiotic resistant. And they, they basically put it into tissue cells so that the tissues would, get infected with the bacteria and the gene transfer. And then they basically wash these cells with antibiotics to kill the ones that didn't take up that material.
Yeah.
So they're kind of screening out the guys that didn't get
the guys that didn't get the message.
Right. Right, exactly.
Right.
So what you're left with is these cells that have antibiotic resistance, but also have, the traits that they're trying to sneak in. Mm-hmm. And then they let it grow, and they say, well, let's see what this did. And sometimes it's, a trait that they think, oh, this is a good thing. So the myth is that they know exactly what they're doing. In reality, it's like playing God. Let's throw this together with this, and we'll wait and see what happens.
Right. And it sounds, if it was just that isolated experiment, that there is some ethical question there.
Right.
But this stuff never goes away, Dr. Kane, right? I mean, it's there to stay.
No.
It's not like you can throw it away and it's all done and, oh, that was a bad experiment and we won't do that again. It's like you've created something and now it's here to stay.
Right. So, for example, what happened in Germany is very interesting. There were, farmers that, thought that the genetically modified thing was going to be the greatest thing. They, started raising, genetically modified foods, and a neighboring farm would be an organic farmer. And the organic farmer would be, like, knowing that the genetic modified crops were going to have an impact upon what their crops were.
Sure, there's pollen and everything else.
Right, so there's this whole issue. So in Germany, they made those farmers raising the genetically modified crops liable if there was damage to the organic farm crop. Mm-hmm. So in effect...
Well, that certainly was a brave legislative position.
So what it ended result was that these farmers knew that there was no guarantee that they wouldn't be on the hook for major things because they've seen it happen, and they stopped raising.
So they took away the economic incentive.
Sure.
By sort of punishing if you did something happen.
But
right?
really, drawing the conclusion or the point that there's no guarantee that there's not going to be these cross reactions with crops that are just, growing,
right,
with no genetic
Exactly.
influence.
And for maybe some people are watching, like, well, who cares? You get a better apple or whatever. But these food sources now there's mounting evidence, scientific evidence that it causes harm, right?
Yes.
And you're seeing, and mostly in laboratory settings, but you're seeing in your clinical practice, disease.
Yeah,
that you can trace back to.
Yeah, the thing that we're seeing in some of the studies, both animal and some human studies, is that there is this alteration of the gut. When we look at the incidence of any of the inflammatory bowel diseases, so we're talking about Crohn's, colitis, irritable bowel, and even
what about, I hate to use the big C word, constipation. That's a form of, your bowel's not working properly.
No,
right?
But in relation to any of the inflammatory bowels, people can either have more, constipation. Or
diarrhea. Okay, so it
goes
both
ways.
Either ends.
But and even when we see the advent of this rash of people who have sensitivities to gluten, it's like when I was a kid, you never heard of gluten sensitivity.
No,
you go to restaurants.
Was.
No, you go to restaurants and they have like a gluten-free menu. When we look at all this predominance of all these issues, I can't help but think something is significantly contributing to this. And I've had patients who I said, all right, you need to really go on a diet restricting all these genetically modified foods. And a lot of them are in the grains, soy, corn. Wheat is not technically genetically modified, but it's been hybridized up the yin-yang. So, having them take out a lot of these and seeing significant, health improvement. And I'm talking people with a slew of autoimmune diseases, from, lupus to rheumatoid arthritis, to, the inflammatory bowel issues, Crohn's, colitis, all those things.
And, really, science is based on evidence and observation. And, so GMOs have really been kind of out there since like 1996, right? And if you look at the proliferation of these diseases in our society, there's a direct correlation.
Yeah, between,
because you're right. How many people, of middle age or older, did you know growing up that had arthritis or irritable bowel or all these allergies? It just was not there.
No. And
it was like, what is this? And autoimmune disorders. I remember being told that my husband had an autoimmune disorder. I'm like, what the heck is that? How does one acquire an autoimmune disorder?
So, there are some thoughts in relation to what's happening. So, autoimmunity is just meaning that your body is attacking itself. And the thought is that, if the gut is inflamed, it has what we call a leaky gut syndrome, which is the junctions of the cells have gotten so inflamed that stuff that shouldn't get through is getting through. And these proteins are initiating almost an immune response because they're seen as the enemy. Like your immune system's always on the lookout for,
things it doesn't recognize.
Right, exactly. And specifically because when we genetically modify something, we're modifying a lot of the proteins. So it is quite feasible that the modification has caused a significant more immune reaction.
So in other words, the food you consume has these proteins that our body doesn't recognize.
Right.
And then it all kind of ends up in your gut.
Right.
Right. And so you've got this huge concentration of unknown things in your gut, and your body's like trying to get rid of it.
Right.
And the things that your body produces to try to get rid of these substances at a really high concentration causes inflammation in your body.
Yep. So that, that immune response, which, is necessary for, treating or for help our body fight viruses and bacteria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's just
no.
that we've got something now that our bodies don't recognize, so it's in overdrive.
Exactly.
Right.
So that process, where your immune system is creating this almost inflammatory reaction, is, creating other things from happening. So, we see a lot of people who have, because of the inflammation, their absorption of nutrients is not as good. Mm-hmm. So we'll see a rash of, malnutrition in a sense, because their nutrients aren't adequate for, processing, even cognitively or other things.
Wow.
So a lot of times, with the rash of things like attention deficit, the spectrum of, autism, we'll see relationships to.
So essentially, what's going on in your gut, it can affect you neurologically as well.
Awesome. Yeah. It's totally what we see.
Right.
So, we know that there, when we look at the process of trying to get people on board with this genetically modified, food, we were sold a lot of, kind of goods.
It was going to save the world and nobody would starve to death.
Right.
Right. And food would be cheaper and everything else. Right.
So, some of the things that, were, kind of told to the farmers would be that, you're going to have higher yields, which has not turned out to be true. Mm-hmm. You're going to have the use of less herbicides and pesticides, which has not turned out to be true. If anything, it's the opposite. And the reason is that, that process of, kind of making these plants, one of the modifications is that they are resistant to the herbicides, so that, they can apply herbicides, like the most common one is Roundup, mm-hmm. And the thought was, we'll just kill all the competing weeds, mm-hmm. and we won't have to use as much of this, herbicide. But what's happened is that the weeds have gotten that trait of being resistant to the herbicide.
Yeah, now how stupid is that, Dr. Kane? They didn't think that there was going to be some genetic modification of the weed?
Yeah, so the question is, it's like, it is like baffling. So, when 60 Minutes did a special on these farmers that are having to increase and increase and increase the amount of herbicides that they're using to the point where their families are getting sick.
And the soil, imagine what's happening to the soil. And not to mention, the seed crop now belongs to the company that's created the genetically modified grain, seed.
Yep.
Because it's proprietary. Because before, farmers would plant their field and then they would retain some of the plants for seed, the seed crop for next year. Well, and that was theirs to keep.
Exactly.
Now they have to literally purchase that seed crop from, let's just use the M word, Monsanto.
Right.
And
so it's patented.
It's a patented thing now. So we've got patented. So we now have patented plants.
So, and what is amazing is, like, I'm a hobby gardener, and I like to kind of have pots in the garden and grow things. And I was using a couple of seed companies that originally were all organic and small kind of business, and then I looked at this, kind of site of all the seed companies that Monsanto owns, and one of the companies I was using was on there. I'm like, I can't use that.
So now, and Monsanto is a chemical company.
Yep.
That has now gotten into the agricultural business.
Yeah, they've been in the agricultural business for a while.
For agricultural chemicals.
Right.
But now they're actually
into the seed and the modification.
Right.
So,
And haven't they created, they have certain strains of corn that actually produces its own antibiotics?
It's a pesticide.
Pesticide.
Yeah.
So it produces its own pesticide. So now you're going to eat this corn that's got a pesticide residue built into it.
Right. So the idea was there's a
natural... Now that's good for your gut, I would imagine. Right?
Well, what's interesting is the pesticide you're talking about is called BT. Mm-hmm. And it's a natural pesticide, that occurs in nature, but it has the effect of, swelling tissue. So if insects eat it, they kind of swell.
Explode.
Right. But, they didn't think, okay, well, what happens if humans eat it? And the cell tissues that, get in contact with this have the same type of
tendency
effect.
to explode.
Right. So it's not very good. But, in trying to find, seeds to put in my garden.
Oh, right.
I realized that right here in Wethersfield, there's
Heart Seed.
Heart Seed Company.
And now we've got the other seed company, too, where Comstocks.
Right.
Yeah.
So both of them do a great job. They've been in business for, long time, and none of their seeds are genetically modified.
Oh, wow.
So, it's a local company. It has, on the packets, GE free. Mm-hmm. So I was like thrilled, beyond belief to both be supporting a local, Connecticut company that, has gone out of its way to make sure that their, crops are not...
Like the real deal.
Yeah, real deal.
Yeah. Biblical.
Biblical, yeah.
Well, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
So now, let's talk about what we can do, especially here in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Because we've got a window of opportunity to, hopefully our viewers have an understanding of GMOs and the dangers, or at least cause for concern. It's not something that we should just be tinkering around willy-nilly, and there is evidence that it's harmful, and there's not enough evidence that it's safe.
Well, about what we can do, it's amazing what hasn't been done. Mm-hmm. So the FDA kind of put the stamp of approval on genetically modified foods by just doing a comparison for the gross macronutrients. So looking at, genetically modified tomato and a regular tomato. They have the same calories? Do they have the same protein? Do they have the same fat? Do they have the same, fiber content? They did no more than that. Mm. So not looking at any of the studies, they just said, all right. So the bar was, not even off the floor. Mm. So something happened significant there that, would allow this to go to the next step where, saying we really don't know any long-term effects of this because none of the studies were longer than, 90 days. Mm. So to say, go ahead and let's use the American public as our, guinea pigs. But I don't know about you, but I was never asked to be a part of a study.
No, I wasn't either. No.
So it is in fact using us as the guinea pigs for a huge experiment.
And I think you're being too kind because guinea pig sort of implies that you are trying to determine whether something's safe or not. I don't think they care. It's just here.
No, right.
You're just going to have it, and this is your food, so eat it. I really don't think that there's any concern for the safety and well-being of the American consumer in our
No, and you know
in our agricultural food paradigm. Do you?
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, besides the, kind of the health issues that we've seen in a lot of the animal studies now, creation of tumors in mice and rats, embryonic changes in amphibians and chickens, so
the thing that's equally frightening, going back to what you were talking about, your medical paradigm at the beginning, food is medicine.
Right.
So
what we've created is toxic medicine.
Right. So you're eliminating. You're not only producing having a food supply that's not safe, but you're also taking away a very important choice that people have for treating themselves and keeping themselves well.
Yep.
Through using food.
So I mean, there are hopeful changes. Like Peru just outlawed all genetically modified food in their country.
Now that is amazing,
right?
To me,
huge.
Because I think we think here, Peru, those people. You know what I'm saying? It's like South America, but just seriously, they've outlawed it.
Yep, outlawed it completely, and it is
unbelievable.
You like to think that the United States would be on the lead for kind of a lot of things.
Food safety. It's the democratic thing to do to ensure a safe food supply.
Right. And so, the right to know, certainly what's in our food is the first step. And we have that, kind of bill before the state house that if we can get it to a vote, it's likely that it will pass.
And we have on our screen the Speaker of the House.
Yes.
In Connecticut. This is Connecticut now, the state of Connecticut. His name is Brendan Sharkey.
And so we want to encourage him.
Right? This 1-800-842-1902. 1902. And, call and say we would like this bill to be brought
to a vote. And that's House Bill 6519.
Now, we should also maybe say to our viewers, too, that besides calling the Speaker of the House, you should also find out who your local state reps are and say that you want them to vote for the bill.
Right.
Because now California had a bill up, and it looked like it was going to get passed. And at the last minute, it was voted down. And I was just reading the other day that Monsanto spent $46 million defeating that bill in California. $46 million.
And I don't know if you saw any of the ads that they, were putting out, but it made it seem like the ads were coming from the FDA. So it was kind of very sly advertisement.
Well, for all we know, it could very well have been.
Yeah. And what you're alluding there is that, when you look at the, relationships that, some of the people on the FDA have to Monsanto, they were former board chairs, former, kind of...
Well, that's in every branch of government. EPA, FDA, they're all from, but truly, this is democracy in action, people. This is an issue that's affecting us, and it's very concrete. And here you have an opportunity. Here's the gentleman's phone number. Call and say, we
want to know. We want to know what's in our food.
We want to know. We want it's not like we're asking to, you can't use it, banning these things. We just want to know what we're eating. We have to have food labeling for everything else. There's any product, any consumer product is labeled, has labeling.
Right, from the dyes to the coloring to everything else.
From everything. So now, tell us about the Whole Foods, what's happened recently with Whole Foods.
Yeah.
Just to give, if you're not scared yet about genetically modified foods, just listen to what happened with Whole Foods.
So, from, consumer support and, pressure, Whole Foods made it a goal that they were going to be, carry no genetically modified foods by a future date. I think it was 2014. And, they got, a lot of support. And then the FDA came in and mandated that they had to carry the genetically modified stuff. And there was a little bit of a battle, and it was just, reported that they kind of caved and said, all right, I guess
well,
the FDA,
the FDA could shut you down and you would not be able to be operated at all.
No, but I mean, it's like, when you think about, the free market in relation to, if you or I opened a shop and, somebody came in and said, well, you got to sell this. And it's like, well, my customers don't want to buy that.
Right.
You would think you were, in a dictatorship rather than
a fascist regime.
So that's kind of scary from my perspective, and I'm sure.
Well, it's very scary because I think, if anything, it's pointing to the power that Monsanto and these couple of other corporations that are involved with genetically modified foods have.
Yeah, that's the scariest part.
It's very, very, very scary, and there's no avoiding it. We all need to eat and have food to consume in order to live.
No, but I mean, the scariest part for me is, certainly, people that have awareness about this issue can do some due diligence. Mm-hmm. But if somebody has no idea, and they're going and trying to do the best they can to feed their family, chances are they might be going to places that they're getting fast food, which is probably the worst place to eat in relation to the genetically modified mm-hmm. stuff. So, or the corn, or the soy, all that is there.
Right. Well, our basic food supply is based on a few crops.
Right.
Because the corn is fed the cows and the
right.
and that. So everything is interconnected. And that's something else we didn't even discuss, is that it's not just the actual grain itself, but the livestock that consumes this product, mm-hmm. and then we consume that. So we're getting that. It's this insidious DNA.
No, exactly.
That really, I know it's kind of complicated, but it's not. It never goes away.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to use, pesticides, because once you stop using them, there's going to be a half-life. They'll eventually,
break down,
metabolize,
right.
and get rid. You can, get rid of it. But this never goes away. It never goes away.
No, and what I'm wondering is, has human DNA been altered through the?
Well, they've shown that other species have had alterations with their DNA from
right.
genetically
So why
modified.
would we think that
we're different?
Ours isn't, and
mm-hmm.
have there, to your knowledge, been any studies?
No, not to my knowledge. Yeah, but you would, infer that it's possible.
You can't.
Yeah.
Because our DNA is fragile.
Well, right, and besides the
it needs certain things to replicate and stay the way it should. And
exactly.
that whole mechanism can be messed with. Doesn't take much to mess with it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, so let's talk about. Let's give that number again. It's Brendan Sharkey, and is there a website or an email for Congressman Sharkey? Maybe we could, for people who really want to maybe even
email him. I think that he got inundated with phone calls today, and they shut his phones down.
But it's a really good thing.
No, yeah, that's a great thing. But he does have an email, and we can try to put that up. And so you could even email and give your opinion on this, because I think this is a tremendous milestone. If we, as Connecticut citizens, get this passed, we'll be the first state
in the union
to do it, which would be an amazing feat.
Well, yeah, I think it's it would be really wonderful if we could.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for people who want, we've just a couple minutes left. People are really concerned about avoiding genetically modified foods. So the real heavy hitters in this GMO marketplace, the little shop of horrors, is corn.
Yes.
You can pretty much assume that all your corn's GMO.
Yeah, they're saying like 80 to 90%.
Yeah,
of
so if it's and especially I'm not, if you go to the farm and it's organic corn, you're eating corn on the cob.
You're probably good.
But if read your label. If it contains corn syrup, corn products, corn flakes, corn chips, it's most likely from a genetically modified thing. Source. Soy.
Soy, again, 80 to 90% of the soy is modified.
Is modified. So just try to do. Wheat, it's not GMO, but it's been so hybridized, right? Sprinkling of pollen and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That it's really just like this super wheat. So it might as well you could call it genetically modified, right?
Yeah, and the alteration you could say that. I mean, there are a move to try to go back to what they call the heritage grains for wheat, and get farmers to grow them because they tend to be not as much an issue. Their gluten content is much less
lower,
right?
So in other words, so if people like bread and it is a source of carbohydrate, so we should look for bread that's a heritage bread, or it would say gluten free.
Yeah, I mean, well, if it's gluten free, it's not made with any of the gluten grains. But
so now let's talk about gluten, because gluten is in stuff you wouldn't even imagine it's in,
like soy sauce.
Because gluten is like it sounds, gluten. It makes things all thick and gooey, right, Dr. Kane? So anything that's saucy-ish, or if you cook it, it kind of gets thick, like oatmeal. Gluten actually spray on things, so when you add water, it sort of makes its own thickening agent. Right?
So it's got that.
So you need to really look and see whether it's got gluten in it.
Yeah, I mean, the gluten grains would be wheat, rye, barley. Oats technically don't have gluten, but they're processed. They're processed in a lot of the plants that they process these. But yeah, it certainly is one of those.
So we've got the soy, the corn, the wheat, and what's another one?
Well, alfalfa is another one. And
alfalfa, that was always so healthy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're going to have you back on the show and talk about this more because. And in the meantime, thank you once again for.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Coming on our show. I know you feel very passionate about this, and hopefully we
keep our fingers crossed.
Please call Brendan Sharkey or email him about HR 6519 to get that up for a vote. And thank you for listening, and good night. We should.